Major developments out of Iraq this hour, where the Prime Minister says he's resigning. Adel Abdul Mahdi's announcement comes after one of the most violent days since anti-government protests began 2 months ago. More than 50 people were killed on Thursday. The curfew in Jazeera has been lifted for families to hold funerals. The UN has called for an investigation, and Iraq's government has ordered an inquiry into the deaths. Protests began in early October over demands for jobs and an end to corruption. Now, in a statement, Abdul Mahdi said, "I will submit my resignation to the House of Representatives in order for the Council to consider its options. May God protect Iraq and its people." Mohammed Jamjoom joins us live from Baghdad. Mohammed, just get us right up to date. What's the latest?
Well, Peter, as you mentioned, the Iraqi Prime Minister has said he is going to be submitting his letter of resignation, but it is not yet clear exactly when that will be. This does not give a date, the statement that was released. It says that it will happen as soon as possible. It also goes on to say that one of the reasons he is doing this is to keep the country from sliding towards violence and chaos, and that this is a response to the call for him to submit his resignation to Parliament so that Parliament can work on all of the options it has. Now, I don't know if you can hear this, but it is extremely loud here. What was a very somber mood just about an hour ago because of the dozens of protesters that had been killed in both Nasiriyah and Najaf yesterday has turned into basically a party here in Tahrir Square, which is the epicenter of the anti-government demonstrations in Baghdad. The reason for that is the announcement by the Prime Minister, Adel Abdul Mahdi. So people here who were quite sad before, activists who I've been speaking with over the course of the past few weeks about the developments here, who were coming up to me and literally crying because of what happened yesterday in the south of the country. Now, the same activists, the same people that were here who were so upset, well, there are fireworks going on all around us. There is music that is playing. There is dancing going on. This is an extremely vibrant scene, and it really goes to show that right now, in this particular moment, you have these demonstrators that are here in Baghdad who feel that this is a win for them. I will say, though, there are still many here that are jaded. I did hear some people just a short while ago say, okay, the Prime Minister is going to resign, and the next person who takes the office is going to be worse than the current one. So, some people wonder what exactly is going to happen next. A lot of questions, but at this particular moment, people extremely happy by this development. Peter?
As far as those protesters are concerned, Mohammed, would they like more than just one man, just the Prime Minister, to tender his resignation?
Peter, I will tell you that what we keep hearing from people here is that Parliament hasn't gone far enough. There's been a lot of talk the last several weeks about electoral reform, about cutting down corruption, but the demonstrators we speak with say there needs to be a complete overhaul of the political system here in Iraq, and that's something that's going to be difficult and going to take time. Now, to that end, I want to bring in a guest that we have here today. This is Mohammed. She's with the Organization for Women's Freedom in Iraq. Yanar, if you can join me now. Thank you for being with us. You've seen this announcement by the Prime Minister. Does this give you hope that now things might start to change, even if it changes at a slow pace?
We feel that it's a first step to a victory over a corrupt, a sectarian, and a criminal government. The killings of hundreds of demonstrators in the past weeks cannot go on. This feels like the victory of the uprising people, that finally the power and the willpower of the people of the uprising has overcome. This has caused euphoria in the demonstrating people here in Tahrir Square, and all the young men who are fighting on the front lines, on the bridges, have heard about it, but it turns out that it's still not a final resignation. We're still waiting to see what will happen. But we feel that this is a huge first step to prove that the people of the uprising have proven their willpower and that the victory will be theirs.
Let's assume that this statement means that the Prime Minister would submit his resignation effective immediately. If that were to happen, if, let's say, tomorrow he submits the paperwork to Parliament, what exactly is the next step? What happens from here on out?
The willpower of the people, the uprising people, don't feel that is enough. The condition is that all the ruling political parties have to step out of the political formula. They are not acceptable anymore. They all took part in the criminal killings of the demonstrators. The people of the Tahrir Square will have their say to the future government of Iraq. Looking at it in a realistic way, we feel that his stepping down is a first step, but we will have to continue the uprising until all our conditions are met.
Do you believe that the protesters, the thousands of anti-government demonstrators that continue to come out, not just in Baghdad, but in the southern cities as well, and other parts of the country, do you believe that now that this announcement has been made, there will be the willpower and incentive to continue to come out?
The ones who have killed the demonstrators were not only the Iraqi army, they were the Iranian militias and the other Islamic militias. If those are still ruling, why would the demonstrators go home? All the killers, all the criminals are from those militias. It's a condition of the demonstration and the uprising that all those criminals come to be judged by the courts and by the people of Tahrir Square and the other cities. It's not enough that he throws his resignation. All those militias, the ruling political parties that caused the corruption, sectarianism, and the division of the people, they have to step down and step out of Iraq.
Mohammed, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. So Peter, as you can hear, it's a very complicated situation here. And just because the Prime Minister has announced that he is going to be resigning now, again, we don't yet know exactly when he is going to be submitting that paperwork, how long the process is going to take. And so that's why you're hearing what you just heard from Yanat. That's why we are hearing what we are hearing from some of the demonstrators here. Yes, they take what happened in the past 15 minutes as a huge victory, but they say they are committed to continue to come out to showcase to the government here that they are committed in demonstrating and that they want to see a complete overhaul of the political system here in Iraq. Peter?
It seems right now, I mean, this story, Mohammed, has just broken in the past, 20 minutes or so, that there are now more questions than answers, because if the Prime Minister's decision to go, clearly we need to know when that will happen. Will there be a domino effect of other people tendering their resignation? And if so many people go, who replaces them?
That is the question of the hour, Peter. If you'll remember, several weeks ago, there were reports emerging from Iraq that the Prime Minister was going to be submitting his resignation as an answer to what the demonstrators were demanding. That never came to pass. You had many officials here saying that he was going to be stepping aside. It didn't happen. Then you had reports that there had been these secret deals made in Parliament here. Various factions, parliamentary groups, essentially coming together to try to ensure that the Prime Minister and this particular cabinet stayed in power because they did not believe that there was anybody else here that could take on this kind of huge responsibility in order to try to mollify the protesters and put an end to this crisis. They put out these statements. They tried to tell the protesters that they were going to enact electoral reform, that they were cutting corruption, that they were, if you'll pardon us, again, it's a pretty chaotic scene here right now. In any case, you had all these statements coming out, and yet the demonstrators continued to come out, despite the threats they faced, despite the fact that hundreds have been killed since the beginning of October, since these demonstrations began, despite the specter of violence, despite the fact that people were being detained. At one point, you had the government here stating that they were going to go after anybody who'd been involved in violence against the protesters. The protesters didn't believe that. And so here we are at this moment where, yes, they consider this a victory, they consider this a win, they consider this to be power of the people and a grassroots movement that has gone beyond sectarianism, that has gone beyond politics, and yet they don't know what's going to happen next. Because one of the key things you have to remember about Iraq, there are no representatives of this leaderless movement who are really having conversations with people in Parliament. So it's very difficult for the people on the street to know what exactly Parliament is up to, and Parliament isn't having discussions with them or inviting the representatives of this movement, even though there aren't any, but anybody with this movement to come and speak with them. So it's very chaotic. It's been very fluid, but right now, at this hour, everybody out here believes that the fact that the Prime Minister has announced that he is going to step down means that they should continue to come out onto the streets. Peter?
There was a point, correct me if I'm wrong here, Mohammed, there was a point perhaps 10 days or 2 weeks ago when the protests were ongoing, when it looked and it felt as if the government either was choosing not to listen or it just couldn't listen for some reason. And at that point, was that a tipping point when the Prime Minister perhaps, or maybe somebody was saying to him behind the scenes, look, you are hemorrhaging political credibility here and for the greater good of the country, not just Baghdad, but the other flashpoints, the places like Nasiriyah that you've been mentioning in your reporting, you've got to do something, and something big, i.e. you've got to go.
Peter, when you would speak to officials here off the record, they would acknowledge that Parliament clearly was looking as though they were tone deaf to what was going on out in the streets. And I would say that, yes, in the last few weeks, it does seem there was a bit of a tipping point. Because when the demonstrators initially started coming out in early October, for a variety of reasons, there was some hope that perhaps they could start negotiations with the government. Now, I've been here almost a month, and in the time that I've been here, I have seen, I guess I would call it not just anger, but lack of trust with regard to the government really increase when you speak to the anti-government demonstrators. You know, time and again, I would be speaking to you and others, and we would be hearing that there was going to be a session of Parliament in which it was going to be discussed how electoral reform was going to make life better here for Iraqis, how it was going to essentially set up a system that was more representative of the population as a whole. And oftentimes, those parliamentary sessions, quorum would not be met, or they would be delayed, or things that were supposed to be on the agenda disappeared from the agenda. And I would be out here with my team in Tahrir Square, and we would go around and ask people who'd been coming out day after day, what do you think of this? And they would say, we know that Parliament is not going to do anything. We don't believe that the Prime Minister is going to do anything, and that's why we're coming out trying to demand his resignation and an overhaul of the political system here. But yes, clearly, the more people came out and the more anger there was because of the violence towards demonstrators in various cities in Iraq, well, that really fueled this protest movement. And it really built. There was a crescendo. And people here, you know, weekdays, weekends, all hours of the day and night, they have continued to come out. They are stupefied, quite frankly, as to why the international community is not doing more. Time and again, I speak to people out here who are begging the United Nations to intervene in some meaningful way. There have been calls by the United States and the EU and the United Nations for early elections, for the Iraqi government to be doing more, to ensure that protesters here have the right to demonstrate peacefully. And yet, people that I talk to, they don't think that goes far enough, and they don't think that the world is really paying attention to their plight. And that's just one more reason why they're angry and so committed to coming out. Peter?
Mohammed, stay with us, please do. Do not move away from our satellite point there in Baghdad, because we just received the very latest pictures of people celebrating on the streets there, the news that the Iraqi Prime Minister has said he's going to tender his resignation. As Mohammed was making the point there, does this solve the problems that people have been reacting to up and down Iraq over the past several weeks? No, it probably doesn't. I think it's fair to say everyone would say it does not solve the problems, the allegations of corruption, no jobs, people losing money, people not earning money. Iraqi security forces shooting dead more than 40 protesters after the protesters stormed and, in effect, torched that Iranian consulate in Najaf. That was one of the flashpoint cities where people were reacting to the situation, the ongoing situation. Also, similar scenes being repeated as part of the protests in Nasiriyah. But these are the latest pictures coming to us as people digest and absorb the news that the Iraqi Prime Minister has said he's going to tender his resignation. At least 29 people dying in that southern city of Nasiriyah that Mohammed was mentioning when troops there opened fire on the demonstrators. They had blocked a key bridge well before sunrise on Thursday. We'll stay with these latest pictures of celebration, and we'll go back to my colleague Mohammed Jamjoom, our correspondent, who's been tracking that story for us out of the Iraqi capital. So I guess as far as the demonstrators are concerned, Mohammed, their key worry is, look, if it's out with the old, it might be in with the old at some point in the future, because the Prime Minister, he's a gentleman who's been in the orbit, the arena of Iraqi politics for several years now.
Oh, it's absolutely right, Peter. I mean, this goes beyond just the head of the government resigning. I mean, the demonstrators here, they want to see basically the complete class of political elites in Iraq gone. And they've been demanding this for quite some time. So, I can only tell you that, we've already heard from folks here in the last half an hour that this is good, but it doesn't go far enough. And until a time in which this mass protest movement really senses that the government, that the government is taking their demands seriously and really getting past business as usual, just having a new prime minister, that is certainly not something that is going to satisfy them. And now that the Prime Minister has announced that he's going to resign, well, everybody who's out here is going to take that as an incentive to keep coming out and keep applying pressure on the government. Peter?
And it's maybe worth wrapping up our discussion this hour, Mohammed, just by kind of signposting the fact that it wasn't just Baghdad, it was other cities as well. It was Nasiriyah, protesters shot dead. In Shatra, there were daily protests since October. So not only did the government seem to lack the ability to get a handle on this, when it did get a handle on it, it then kind of reacted in the wrong way and came back too hard, too often, and got up close and so personal in totally the wrong way with those people who were demonstrating.
Peter, you're mentioning Nasiriyah. Let's talk about Najaf as well. These are two majority Shia cities in the country's south. And yesterday, you had dozens of anti-government demonstrators killed by security forces. That's according to eyewitnesses and medical sources that we've been speaking with in those cities when they were out demonstrating. Let's talk first about Najaf. Najaf, of course, is one of the Shia holy cities here in Iraq. And you have a majority Shia population, and you had demonstrators that about a day and a half ago attacked the Iranian consulate in Najaf. And I cannot stress enough just how big of a deal that is, just how much of an escalation that is. Because these demonstrators say that they are tired of the outsized role and influence that Iran plays inside of Iraq. And so they burned parts of the Iranian consulate. A few weeks before that, 3 weeks ago, you had a similar situation in another Shia holy city, in Karbala, in the south, in which demonstrators attacked the Iranian consulate. These were clear warning signs to the government here, to the majority Shia government here, that they needed to do something to really show the protesters that they were taking their demands seriously. And the protesters didn't feel that the government was doing that. Then you have what happened in Nasiriyah. You had you had around 20 people by our last count, according to medical sources, that were killed when they were in clashes in front of a government building yesterday. Today you have these funerals going on. This is something that not just in the south people are reacting to, here in Baghdad as well. All the people that we speak with in this movement, they say that what makes this movement different from prior protests is that this is going beyond sects and that this is going beyond politics, that this is a grassroots movement, a patriotic movement. Iraqis coming together, not as Sunnis, not as Shia, but as Iraqis, and that they want a government that will treat them as their own country, that will give them opportunity that will build a future for them. And when they see the security forces continue to go after these demonstrators, it just fuels this anger, and it's why the anger has been building, and it's why the demonstrators continue to come out despite the threats they have faced. Peter?
Mohammed, we had to get clarity and context on this developing story. You've given us that in the past 20 minutes. We'll come back to you, I suspect, in the next half hour or so. But in the meantime, thank you so much. Well, Abdul Mahdi's announcement comes just shortly after Iraq's top Shia cleric, Ayatollah Ali, al-Sistani, condemned the use of lethal force against protesters and called for a change in leadership.
The parliament from which this current government is drawn is asked to reconsider its choice in this regard and to act according to Iraq's interest and preserve the blood of its children to prevent the country from slipping into violence, chaos and destruction. We confirm again that attacks against peaceful protesters are forbidden, as well as them being prevented from having the right to demand reforms. We also confirm that attacking private and public property is forbidden and that property should not be left to be attacked by infiltrators and their allies.